Hello and welcome back to CxReports. Today we will start our series of video tutorials dedicated to data sources. And the first one is going to be the API data sources. Through this tutorial, we're going to walk you through how to set up API configurations, how to handle authorization, and how to utilize your APIs to fetch data and create something very similar to this invoice that we have in front of us. So let's start. I have created a new report called API invoice. And in here, we're going to utilize data fetched from a remote API server. So how to do this? First of all, we're going to register a new API data source outside under our connections and then API connections. In here, I'm going to click on the add API configuration. I'm going to name this configuration. Let's call it remote API. For the base URL, we're going to go with HTTP localhost 3000, where I set up a mock server for this demonstration. And we're going to use the bearer authentication. Now, we're going to set up authentication in here in order to keep token in one place. And in case we need to change it in the future, we can do it here instead of on every single endpoint individually. Under the headers, you can add additional headers if your endpoints require you so. And under the endpoints, we're going to add a couple of predefined endpoints. So for now, we're going to just add invoices. It's going to be a GET request. And with this, we can save our configuration. We can go back to the report, to the API invoice. And in here, we're going to utilize the newly created data API connection to create a parameter, which is going to return to us a list of invoices. So we go in a new parameter, add new parameter. We're going to specify it's a lookup type. It's an API source, which is using our defined remote API connection, the invoice endpoint, and we can even preview the results and see we have an invoice ID and a customer name. So we're going to go in here. We're going to say the value field is going to be invoice ID, and in here it's going to be customer name. And we're going to save the data. So the value field is invoice ID, so the name is going to be the invoice ID, and we're going to add it to a standard parameter group. So now when I click on a parameter, and in here, I get the list of invoices which my database returns. In order to fetch a single invoice, we're going to have to return back, go to our API connections, and we're going to add another endpoint. So this one was to fetching all the invoices, but we're going to add a new one called invoices / and then we're going to use our templating language and say that this is a parameter within curly braces with the name invoice ID. And we're going to save. Click save again and go back to the report. In here, under data sources, we're going to add a new data source. We're going to name it invoice. And for the type, we're going to say it's an API with our remote API connection. And in here now we have two endpoints, invoice and invoice with an ID. So we're going to select the second one. And you can see how we are automatically recognize that it requires a parameter, and we provide you an API mapping in here. So we're going to say this is required, and the name is going to be parameters.invoice ID, which is the correct parameter we set up a few moments ago. So we're going to just save this now. Under our parameters, we can specify which of these invoices we're going to use. So let's say that is INV1001. We're going to apply. And in our data explorer, we can see that under the data and then key invoice, we have our invoice ID, customer name, customer ID, and a couple of additional items. So this way you can leverage the outside specified APIs and API configurations with predefined authentication options and even a list of existing APIs in case you want to do so. So now under our report, we can just add a couple of elements. So we're going to call this key value get, for example. Add a new key field in here, customer, and the value is going to be $data.invoice.customer name. For the value in here, we can do, let's see what we have. Let that date, and we're gonna format this as an actual date. We can add a key field width. Let's say it's at least 150 pixels. Let's make it a bit less. And we can add a separator in here, spacer. And let's add the data table underneath that. We can see what we have available in terms of an arrays. So in this case, we only have items. You can generate the columns, and we have automatically added our items in here. So I'm gonna add a text component in here, and I'm gonna call this items with additional spacer underneath. So this is now a great representation of how you can leverage a single API configuration and then utilize this configuration in both parameters and data sources. And since they're now linked, in case we change this parameter to a different option, and when you apply this, okay, we took the same one. So let's say the additional one, apply. Now it appears that we have a problem. Even though we are changing the parameter to a new parameter value, so let's say this one, the values in the UI are not updated until we do a complete refresh of the application. This is a common mistake that happens when you specify data sources and forget to add dependencies to other parameters or data sources. So in order to rectify this, we're going to go to data sources. We're going to edit our data source. And even though the value for this parameter in here is coming from the params.invoiceID, it's not connected via dependency section. So we're going to have to add under dependencies parameters our invoice ID, and we're going to save this. Now it's going to update every time we change our parameter. So let's say this new invoice ID in here, we can apply, and we see a new customer and new items. So we are missing in here an invoice ID. We can quickly add that, move it to the top, and say invoice ID. And for the value, it's going to be $data.invoice customer ID, invoice ID. And we can save. And then again, if I change to a new customer or a new invoice, all the values are going to be updated automatically. One more thing I would like to show you is what happens if you have an API that returns an array of items that you would like to use as a parameter, but the data structure you receive is not really suitable to be used as a parameter, specifically our lookup that we have in here. So if we go back to the parameter and we see what we have in here, we have our invoices endpoint. And if we preview this, we're going to see that we are getting invoice, an array of objects, which every object contains an ID and a name. But what happens if this is not the case? So I have created one more endpoint, and for this specific endpoint, it's not going to be from the specified list, but I'm just going to edit the existing one. And it's going to be called wrapped. And the idea is, once you run this, you can see that we have an object with a key result, which contains the array of items which should be used by our lookup field. Now, this is a problem because lookup cannot automatically recognize this. But luckily, we have something in here called response mappers. So we can specify which type. In this case, we only have JavaScript. So we can select this as JavaScript. And then in here, we can see that we have a response. Now we are not relying on any other parameters, so this is not going to be useful for us. But for the response, we can now remap the response that actually came from the server into a useful response. So instead of just returning the response in here, we're going to say that we are returning the response.result that we saw in here that we have. So now this should also be perfectly fine. And once we select the parameter, again, we are getting the correct values and correct values displayed and correct values selected, even though we are now relying on a completely different endpoint, which is not returning an array, but rather an object with a key that contains the array that we would like to use. Now, this frame parameter can be utilized to remap data in any way you like to do. You can also specify and change the name if you need to do that as well. So this is a great way to leverage existing APIs you already have, integrate it with the CxReports, and allow CxReports to fetch data from them. You can specify the authentication in one place on the global API configuration section, and then leverage that authentication in every single endpoint you're going to use across all the parameters and data sources within your reports.